Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious today and glad that you're patient. Sometimes we go right on at 4 o'clock, and other times, like today, we're just running around with our heads cut off. Today, I had to get a board meeting ready for our director, Karan Conklin. And here we are, got some space history for you today. We're going to talk about a couple of monumental days in space history. One, the first spacewalk by Alexei Leonov, and another, the Gemini 8 mission, a near disaster for Neil Armstrong and David Scott, two future moonwalkers. And we've got an interesting shuttle story where a bat clinged to the external tank on what launch director Mike Leinbach described as one of the more beautiful shuttle launches he's ever seen. And we've got pictures to prove that from our friend Carlton Bailey. So wanted to say hello to Marty Winkle, my co-producer. Marty, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. How are you?
Well, good. Marty, this is episode 773, as I teased on our Facebook announcement for today's show. 773, my friend. Can you believe that? You and I have missed 4 or 5 for vacations or illness or whatever, but pretty incredible as we're coming up to 3 years of providing you Stay Curious broadcasts right from the birthplace of the space age, Brevard County, and our American Space Museum. And we're literally 10 miles away from those launch pads. And there's one of them on our green screen here that Carlton Bailey took way back in the shuttle era of STS-119. That was in 2009 we're looking at back there. But we're going to be celebrating Shuttle Fest here in a month, April 15th at the Hyatt Place in Titusville. And we're going to show the documentary, The Base to Space, all about Mobile Launch Platform 2, shown there on top of the crawler in this wonderful photograph by Ann Miklos. And we know that you're going to enjoy a wonderful fellowship of space workers, as well as programs centering around this documentary. And we're going to have some surprises for you along the way. One of the surprises we plan to have is we're going to have these two talented artists as part of a panel talking about space art and its impact in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, the cornerstone of education in American schools today. Chris Calley and Doug Forrest, both very talented artists. Chris, of course, the son of Paul Calley, one of the first artists allowed on Kennedy Space Center. And Marty, with that, you've got a comment already or question?
I have a question from, gosh, I just lost it. Robert Law. Oh, will Shuttle Fest be streamed online?
For you, Robert, we're going to stream it live, okay? In fact, we have a gentleman in our museum from Scotland today. So I asked him if he knew you up in Dundee, and he said no. So it's a small country. We just don't know everybody running around there. But good question there. We do intend to stream this like we did last year. So we don't want to leave you all out. And April 15th is a Saturday. That will also be the Saturday of Yuri's Night at Kennedy Visitors Complex. That starts after 6 o'clock, so no conflict there. Maybe you can attend both. Chris Calley, well-known artist for his space artwork. Doug is a Apollo arts concentrator there. Here is Chris's latest creation of the Artemis rocket, photograph taken by our good friend Mark Usiak, and a tribute to the Mercury astronauts and other things in there, including a little Easter egg of Chris Calley himself is in that picture in there. So Chris has had this worked up for about a year. And then this is the type of work that you can expect from Doug Forrest. This is a rendition of Apollo 15 with Jim Irwin on his knees holding down the rover, and that is above the rock there is David Scott. And what I love, what these two guys are going to be part of a panel with another artist, Ron Wood, we're going to ask to be on this panel at Shuttle Fest, and talk about some of the intricacies of putting this piece of artwork together, where Doug Forrest actually talked to astronaut David Scott about this to get a feeling and depiction of what was going on with Jim Irwin there as the rover was actually sliding off a little bit of a hill there. So these are the type of programs that we want to have at Shuttle Fest, as well as create an atmosphere of a great fellowship of all you shuttle workers, as well as people like myself that lived the shuttle era, and we're just purely space geek fans about it. So April 15th, a month from today, will be Shuttle Fest. And am I a little stressed out about it? You bet. But why not? Because I will always work better under pressure. Just ask my good buddy Marty Winkle here as we threw this together, this program together here in the last hour or so. Didn't actually throw it together. It's always a choice of what to go with. And as we've been doing this, our third year coming up, we do have quite a database of space history. One part of space history that's going to happen over the weekend that we want to talk about right now. Well, two things I'll tell you about right now before we get to that is this would have been Alan Bean, Apollo 12 moonwalker and commander of the second Skylab mission. This would have been Alan's birthday. He would have been 91 years old today, and he passed away 3 or 4 years ago. And also on this date in 1962, Scott Carpenter replaced Deke Slayton as the being the orbital mission following John Glenn. And Deke Slayton had was disqualified because of a minor heart arrhythmia that probably a little metoprolol like I take could have taken care of. He did get that straightened out. Slayton did, and then flew on the Apollo-Soyuz test project. But Scott Carpenter replaced Slayton on this date, March 15th in 1962. Well, March 18th is over the weekend, and we wanted to talk about the first spacewalk by Alexei Leonov, a guy that I wish I could have met. Here, the first spacewalk was done by a Russian on Vostok 2, March 18th, 1965. Okay, so we are getting 50, we're almost 60 years away from that. Quite an achievement at the time. Russia, of course, operating their moon race under the cloak of secrecy. We didn't know about this till years later. Leonov became a best friend of Tom Stafford when they both commanded their respective spacecrafts that met in 1975 July, the Apollo-Soyuz test project. But a brave Russian, Alexei Leonov was, when he took the first tentative steps into the cosmos 68 years ago on March 18th. The world astounded by a spacewalk so early in the history of manned spaceflight. Though it was a 20-minute spacewalk, it was cut short about 10, 12 minutes. Alexei Leonov had luck on his side because his spacesuit ballooned up. Actually, what happened was the Vostok spacecraft had a hatch on it that inflated out. I've seen this in the Cosmosphere, what he trained on. Really cool display of this at the Kansas Cosmosphere in Hutchinson. Many of us have been there. Hope you get to go there. He came out and Belayev, another cosmonaut's inside there. So he had kind of an exit hatch. Once he got in this, his spacesuit had expanded so much he could hardly get back in that tunnel. And then to get in the spacecraft itself, he had to depressurize the spacesuit, let some air out. Very risky, very dangerous, and they didn't let on how dangerous it was, the Russians, okay? Because when we did the spacewalk, about 2 weeks later with Ed White, though it went well and about twice as long as Leonov's, it too, Ed White's spacesuit puffed out. He had a little bit of trouble getting back in that Gemini, but not as much as Leonov found. And then when they landed, when Vostok 2 landed on March 18th, after a few hours in space, they were way off base. The cosmonauts had to brave wolves lurking around the spacecraft. They had to use their survival techniques. They actually had to ski out 2 days later because helicopters couldn't even get to where they landed in the forest of Russia. And then Leonov began training immediately for the Soviet moon mission. He may have been the first lander Russian on the moon. We honor him at Spaceview Park with his handprints there in our Apollo area there for the Apollo-Soyuz test project. And Kubasov, the other cosmonaut that was on the Apollo-Soyuz test project, is also there at Spaceview Park. Leonov died in 2019 at age 85. Belyayev, who was his commander of this flight, died 5 years after this mission of cancer. So, well, very brave, very dangerous, and they were lucky to get out alive on this, quite frankly. The first spacewalk in 1965 on March 18th over this weekend, be 68 years from now. So, well, let's talk a little bit about shuttles of the month. And you know, we love our shuttles of March. The month of March has 10 shuttles with 59 astronauts orbiting the Earth. 8 of them are women. We're going to feature those women next week on Stay Curious as we talk about the Women's Month and significant, important women of the space program. So we're going to talk about the women who orbited Earth in March. Some cool missions there. Astro 2, we're going to have Mikey Haddad come and talk about the Astro telescope payloads. He'll be here Wednesday. We had a Hubble repair mission, 109C. Well, not repair, but upgrade. 109. The C's on my meme there mean the C for Columbia, D for the Discovery, and so forth there. So only Challenger didn't orbit the Earth in the month of March. We got a DoD mission there, STS-29, STS-3, the only landing out at White Sands with Jack Lausma and Gordon Fullerton. Jack Lausma will be out to Space Center at the end of the month, March 30th and April 1st. You know I'm going to be out there and see that gentleman. So, but one of the missions that was the highlight of March that they will always talk about is STS-119, when these 7 astronauts went up to the space station and they actually had a bat that took a ride on the external tank. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here are the STS hard hat mission. There's the astronauts. That is, thank you, Carlton Bailey took this photograph of the astronauts, all men, going to space. The crew were Lee Archibald's the commander. Let's see, Lee was on the far right there. Pilots Tony Antonelli beside him. We met Tony, Marty. Did you see Tony was in town? He looked through my telescope. He was staying at an outreach event with kids from his hometown, and he came to where I had a telescope set up at a Holiday Inn. A very nice guy. Mission specialist Joe Acaba. Joe in the middle there is an Artemis astronaut. I tag him as the commander of the Gateway, but we'll see. John Phillips is the oldest man there on the far left there with the gray hair. Steve Swanson, Rich Arnold, and Koichi Wakata. And Wakata there at the end just landed, all right, on Crew Dragon. So he was launched in March on STS-119 on this date, March 15th, and he landed what would have been March 11th. Wakata, quite an amazing individual, one of the few humans that have been in an American, a Russian, and then the private Crew Dragon spaceship. So Wakata was left up there, and Sandy Magnus returned after 35 days. Wakata was left for Expedition 18. And this was the partner. Here's one of the space station managers. It was truly a fantastic day in space. The International Space Station team and its partnerships are on Cloud 9 with the completion of the integrated truss assembly as well as the finalization of our electrical power grid to the space station. It took years to get there, but STS-119 accomplished all that. All right. There's Carlton's remote picture of this beautiful liftoff, but it had a little help from Batman or Bat Power there. As you see, the arrows on the bottom point to the orange external tank is an arrow there where this little critter clung, and don't know if he flew away at the last second or whatnot, but there was a lot of conversation at the time. about the fruit bat. Uh, it was revealed, though, to have been a free-tailed bat that clung onto the fuel tank during the launch. NASA observers had believed the bat would fly off once the shuttle started to launch, but it didn't, and it probably was shaken off and incinerated by the rocket exhaust. A bat doctor analyzing pictures believed the bat had a broken wing, which made it unable to fly. Aww. But Mike Leinbach, this was like your 27th of 37 launches that you were the flight director. Mike Leinbach said this at the press conference: I've seen a lot of launches, and this was the most visually beautiful launch I had ever seen, said Mike Leinbach. And here's some pictures that Carlton Bailey took of it. What a shot of the SRBs 2 minutes later separating in that evening twilight. I love that picture. And there's the clouds that Leinbach was talking about with the different colors, red, white, and blue there in the sky. How beautiful is that? And then Carlton took the moonrise shot over the pad there. As I consult my shuttle scroll here, which pad was that, Carlton? 119 rocketed off of pad 39A, which is now occupied by, of course, SpaceX. So they launched off that last night. So how about that? 2009 is a launch the day after they launched the SpaceX launch on the same pad. That was the 36th mission of Discovery, the most flown of all the orbiters with 39. So that was his 36th mission there. Beautiful moonrise. Carlton, thank you for sharing your photos. He is one of the premier space photographers out there, still working at the Cape. So, well, we wanted to share here 2 more items of space history that happened over the weekend. This is the official portrait of Gemini 8. Of course, rookie commander Neil Armstrong on the right, David Scott on the left. David Scott is still with us. I believe David's around age 89. Of course, we lost Neil Armstrong 10 years ago, I believe, is when he passed away. Well, this was the 6th crewed flight in NASA's Gemini program, launched March 16, 1966. It was the 14th crewed American flight and 22nd crewed space flight of all time. Think about that. The mission conducted the first docking of 2 spacecraft as they launched in a Gina rocket there on the Atlas. Gina was the target vehicle on an Atlas rocket, and we're so proud of our Atlas Gallery, Cape Canaveral Gallery room, where over 350 Atlas launches were done, and we have a lot of that hardware in our gallery here at our museum. That's the launch of Armstrong and Scott on GT8 officially. You know, they used Roman numerals back in the 60s. So V111 would be the Roman numeral for it. And but sometimes you'll see the Arabic letter 8 for it. Well, NASA avoided a fatal disaster shortly after this flight as a stuck thruster on spun the spacecraft around. Now, what happened was, and here is the Gemini 8 at the Neil Armstrong Museum, a picture I took a few years ago. It looks beautiful in Neil's hometown of Wapakoneta, Ohio. There is attached to this on the back a service module that has thrusters around it, 8 of them. And after they docked with the Agena rocket, the first docking ever, all right, and I go like that to show you the docking, they slowly started spinning, and they thought something was wrong with the thruster on the Agena. But no, when they undocked, a thruster was stuck on the Gemini and started whipping Scott and Armstrong around once a second. 1001, this 2-ton spaceship went around, and it was spinning kind of like not tumbling over end and end, but spinning like a wheel sideways there, like a roll axis there. Thank you, Marty. And well, the astronauts may have temporarily blacked out, though some say they didn't. The 3-ton spaceship kept rolling, reaching a momentum of once a second. And Armstrong pulled out the thruster breaker circuit, put it back in. Then he had to use the thrusters at the nose there. You can just see those at the left side there. that were to be used only for reentry. He had to use those to stabilize the spacecraft. That meant that the spacewalk by David Scott was going to be scratched, and they had to immediately come down from orbit, and they did. Neil Armstrong definitely saved their lives. The frantic incident occurred out of communications range and lasted a terrifying 30 minutes. Scott later praised Armstrong's actions. Here they are. Here's the docking. Wanted to show you the docking vehicle that they attached to and then started spinning. Agena target was a big target. They left it up there, by the way. Remote Houston could control it, and it was later visited by, I think, Gemini 10. Here in our, who worked on this was a good friend of ours, Gary. Where's Gary? There's Gary. Gary worked for Gemini in in McDonald there. What's Gary's last name? Gary Hayward. Gary Hayward there. And he's pointing in our display case what is a piece of hardware that was singled out. Oh, what did I do there, Marty? Oh, I went backwards. There, Gary's pointing in our case there that we have in our Gemini gallery. This piece of hardware that is believed to have caused the error where a piece of solder got stuck in this. There's no capacitors or resistors in this. This is all old school solder and so forth. And this had to have been inside the command module or the Gemini spacecraft itself. If it was on the service module, it would have been ejected out and burned up in the atmosphere. So that's caused us to do a little bit of tracing down what we do have here. But it was given to us as part of the Gemini 8 and part that failed that caused them to land prematurely. There they are safely down. You can see the green dye in the ocean to point out where they are. Luckily, it was during the day when they were launched in the morning. They only did 7 orbits of the Earth. And imagine that, with Neil Armstrong having 7 orbits of the Earth, he became the commander of the most important mission in NASA's history, the moon landing of Apollo 8. David Scott segued into another Gemini flight, and then, no, he didn't go to another Gemini flight. He went to Apollo 9, orbiting the Earth, testing out the command module, and then he was later the commander of Apollo 15 and flew the lunar module to the surface of the moon at what I think is the greatest exploration of all at Hadley Rill, popping over a 3-mile high mountain and then landing next to a lava tube that had collapsed. A great mission with Jim Irwin there. But there's Armstrong, of course, on the right, the left seat of the Gemini, and Scott there. They're safe and sound back on the ship. Little did they know how close they could have come to dying. Marty, if that was still orbiting Earth, well, if it was, they probably would have had the shuttle bring it back someday. But they would have orbited the Earth for a good 25, 30 years before someone would have been able to bring them back. But there they are back alive there. So looking at some wonderful people watching today. Hope Chris Callie and Doug Forrest enjoyed the shout out to their talent. Robert Law, thank you, sir, for joining us. Gary Gerald is up in Collins, Georgia. Steve Hammer, thank you, Steve, for your contribution. I'm going to try to show your pictures maybe tomorrow. Keith Sewell's in Portland, Oregon, Marty. Keith's a good friend of our museum, lived around here, and he's out enjoying his retirement. And Dave Stengy's watching in Michigan. Melissa Pope is watching here, and so is Hazel Banks, local. And Hazel knows this Gemini well. In fact, that's where she started working, I think, was Gemini 8. And Hazel met both these gentlemen, David Scott and Neil Armstrong, many, many times in her career at NASA. And we love Hazel for all she does for our museum here. And Lois Bingham. Louise, thank you for watching, Louise. And staying curious. Tell your friends to watch us on YouTube. Monetize that channel for us as we are reaching out. Well, the final Stay Curious bit of history we have today, Marty, and you're going to love it because we love this man and everything that he stands for. Robert Goddard. on this, not this date, March 16th, tomorrow. And we're doing March 16th tomorrow for good reason. We've got a great guest that you're going to enjoy tomorrow. And I'll tell you about him in just a minute. But Robert Goddard launched for the first time a primitive liquid rocket 41 feet high during a 2.5-second flight, and the space age truly began on March 16th, 1926. The first liquid fuel rocket by Robert Goddard going, and he used gasoline and liquid oxygen from his Aunt Effie's farm in Auburn, Massachusetts. This is the tribute we have with a paver there to Goddard. And we'll show you a close-up of that paver, but this is how our museum started, with the handprints of the Mercury astronauts are around that 7, all right, the Mercury emblem. And the people, there's bricks all over this pyramid and in the front and sides of space workers. In fact, good friend John Tribe is on this side there. And we've got all the Mercury astronaut handprints except Gus Grissom, who had passed away when this project was undertaken in the late 1990s. Goddard launched the world's first liquid fuel rocket. He had his wife was present, and he had 2 of his assistants, Henry Satch and Percy Roop, who was Clark's assistant professor in the physics department. Goddard's diary entry for the event was notable for its understatement. March 16th, went to Auburn with Satch in the morning. Esther and Mr. Roop came out at 1 o'clock. Tried rocket at 2:30. It rose 41 feet, went 41 feet, and then went 184 feet vertical in 2.5 seconds after the lower half of the nozzle burned off. Brought materials to the lab. And then Goddard, here's a picture of the great man working on one of his inventions there. He later dubbed the rocket Nell, Nell. He said the first flight with a rocket using liquid propellants was made yesterday at Aunt Effie's farm in Auburn. Even though the release was pulled, the rocket did not rise at first, but the flame came out and there was a steady roar. After a number of seconds, it rose slowly until it cleared the frame, and then at express train speed, curving over to the left and striking the ice and snow, still going at a rapid rate. What a thought to witness the birth of liquid fuel rockets. The launch is now a historic mark. There it is, with a National Historic Landmark, the Goddard Rocket Launching Site. A genius who had rocket travel figured out in the 1930s, but little financial support to implement the dream of orbiting Earth or going to the moon. Robert Goddard was a complex man who was criticized by the New York Times for his notion of going to the moon. The New York Times said, of course, a rocket will not work in the vacuum of space. Mr. Goddard does not know the Newtonian physics of the time. They really laid him out, all right? He became a reclusive because of this New York Times editorial, worked on rocket patents from his rocket ranch in New Mexico until his death of throat cancer at age 62 in 1945. In the middle of World War II, he died. And had he lived, had he had money, we would have been orbiting bombs in the World War II, okay? I guarantee you that, because the V-2 rocket that became the predecessor of American rockets, thanks to Wernher von Braun, was based, when Wernher von Braun was surrendered to the Allies, they said, how do you know so much about rockets, and your V-2 is so amazing rocket? And he says, well, your Robert Goddard had it all figured out in the 1920s. We've just been doing what he said to do. So what an underestimated guy. Too bad he became a recluse. He never saw an object orbit Earth, though he could have put satellites up by 1940 if given the proper financial backing. So there you have, folks. History is so star-crossed with what ifs and what could have beens. And here, Robert Goddard, one of the geniuses of our time, Marty and I, we will always share this genius's time every time we get a chance to. There is where it all began in, Auburn, Massachusetts, for gosh sakes, in a snowy field. Who would have thought that now that we launched a beautiful SpaceX rocket last night right on the shores of a beach here in Florida. So, well, hope you've all enjoyed this episode of Stay Curious. I know you're going to enjoy tomorrow because we're going to have for our first-time guest, Mr. Frank Custer. There's Frank as a young man. He was a contractor for Lockheed Martin as a quality control inspector. He told me, Marty, that the NASA quality people were called quality assurance, and QC are the contractors. So I already learned something. Frank's going to have a good show for us tomorrow. We're going to talk about the mate-demate device, something we've never talked about on Stay Curious in detail. He, of course, followed the shuttle, he said, wherever it went, and that was including when it had to be taken off the ground and put on the 747 and flown from California or New Mexico or wherever it landed to Kennedy Space Center. And then they had to sometimes put it on a 747 here at Kennedy Space Center to take to California and Rockwell to be upgraded. So that is Mr. Frank Custer breaking the rules, sitting in the commander's seat of a space shuttle. He'll tell us all about that tomorrow to help you all stay curious. And we're looking forward to Frank being a regular guest on Stay Curious. He's a good guy, very knowledgeable about some of our artifacts here in the museum. So, well, we hope that you've all enjoyed that. A little bit of look at space history from the first human spacewalk to the first liquid fuel rocket here. And where else are you going to get this kind of content? Nowhere except the American Space Museum and Stay Curious. And we're so glad that you have been part of our program. Some of you for 3 years, and we'll be pulling all stops out here next week as we celebrate 3 years of bringing you programming born out of that horrible COVID pandemic. It is our silver lining here at the museum, thanks to the support and belief of our executive director, Karan, Conklin, and our whole board of directors. It's about to start meeting right now. So, Marty, let's see if we still got a job when we come back tomorrow here and see what the board's talking about. But we're pretty sure that they love what you're doing, enjoying space history on Stay Curious. Marty, any final comments on today's show on our UCX family microphone?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, I'll have a job because I'm not getting paid.
Yes, right.
So they won't fire me. And then also Carlton Bailey and Tom Usiak are watching.
All right, CB and TC there. Great guys that are helping us, again, raise the bar on our involvement in our space community, just like Chris Calley and Doug Forrest are in the art world. So we love our valuable partners out there. We want you to be one of them. And met Josh Smith today. He's an airplane pilot just like you, Daniel DeYoung. So he also flies those big Airbuses. So we're really attracting some good quality people, and we are pleased with that. And we hope that we can see you at Shuttle Fest in a month. If not, we'll have it on virtually there. So, Marty, thank you for everything today. Thank you all for staying curious with us. Until tomorrow, I'm Marquette saying I can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us.